The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be having this conversation with you guys this evening. So the first place I wanted to start our conversation, now that we've gotten a little bit of bios on each of you, I can't wait to dive into these stories, but I thought it would be fun if we got to know you a little bit better first. So, I was recently watching a podcast called Call Her Daddy by Alex Cooper, and for anyone who might be familiar, and one of her most recent guests was Sarah J. Maas of the ACOTAR series, a really exciting podcast, and one of the most fun things that stood out to me about that episode is when she talked about her writing setup. You really got this behind-the-scenes look at who she was, and she confessed that her writing setup is comprised mostly of Cheetos, Diet Coke, and tears. And I thought to myself, wow, that is so real. And I thought, I wonder what these women's writing setups is like, and maybe they can help us get to know them a little bit more before we dive into their work. So let's start with you, Sonya. What's your writing setup like?
It's messy. It's definitely not something you would come across on Pinterest. I think of it as Diet Coke and sour cream and onion Ruffles chips. I have my dog and a lot of scattered notes and sticky notes and paper, and I usually don't look as great as I do in my filtered pictures on Instagram. That's what my setup is.
Love it. That's where the magic happens. And about you, Jordyn?
I'm gonna sound like a robot, but my desk is actually very orderly, and I am operating on really strict guidelines as to how many words I want to hit every day. And I also have a set time of when I want to close my laptop for the day and be done. I find that I need to enforce like very, very regimented rules in order to be productive, because it's so easy for me to just get super sucked in and never want to step away. So I keep my desk orderly and I keep my schedule equally orderly.
I feel like I'm somewhere in between. Like I do keep normal work hours, but like sticky notes everywhere. I think for me, like the key is I have a shelf like right above my desk of my published books, just so I can remind myself that I do know what the hell I'm doing. Whenever I'm inevitably screaming at the wall, as SJM was saying she does too, so I feel like I can relate to her there.
So we have the whole spectrum. We have like very regimented, chaotic, and everywhere in between, and from that we get some amazing stories, and I love that. So moving forward, I have to confess, I'm writing my first manuscript right now. And thank you. And something that I found is that inevitably, there are pieces of me that find their way into my writing. It's just kind of like art imitating life. And when I was reading these books and how personal these characters were and their journeys and the vivid worlds that you were creating with them, and I thought to myself, I wonder if there are aspects of themselves that have made their way into these stories. And I wanted to know if you could speak to that. Let's start with you, Ellie.
I think in my recent release, If Only You Knew for Sure, these are like two characters who've just hit 30. They've had thriving careers and they're very good at them. But just sort of hitting that age where they're wondering, like, is this actually what I want to be doing for the rest of my life? And that was something that I could absolutely relate to. I mean, I had a great corporate job that I loved, that I was very good at. But there was just that sense of like, okay, but am I having fun doing this? And can I actually see myself doing this for decades longer? The answer was no, as you can probably guess by the fact that I'm sitting in front of you. So definitely could relate to that, like later coming of age for them.
Jordyn, go ahead.
So my book that just came out in January, See You at the Summit, is the story of a woman who makes a really big deal out of finally coming out as bisexual, and she's ready to live, you know, her most queer life ever, and then she reluctantly falls for a straight guy. And has to, you know, grapple with nuances of queer identity that come along with that. And what does it mean to be an out queer woman in a relationship that makes everybody think that you're straight? And that is something that I myself have experienced. I'm bi, I've been in relationships with men, and I have felt a lot of the things that my protagonist, Simone, feels. I got some family in the audience. Maybe you didn't know that. I'm bi. So I definitely put a lot of the anxiety and identity, issues that I have dealt with into the character of Simone and what she goes through in her love story with Ryan.
I think for me, both Sorry Not Sorry and The Fake Matchmaker, I was extremely single. And I was going through the dating chaos of trying to navigate online dating, being single, and feeling the pressures of trying to find that perfect person. And so, both my protagonists, and Sorry Not Sorry, she has her own breakup agency. So she's breaking people up for a living. And in The Fake Matchmaker, she gets to a point where she decides that she needs to create a fake matchmaking agency to find Prince Charming. So I always felt like in that life of being single that I wanted to either open up a breakup agency or create a fake matchmaking site. Neither of those things happened, but I think those characters that I created definitely drew on the fact that I was single and was navigating online dating and modern dating and all those apps. So yeah, a lot of that anxiety, that sadness, and just fear goes into the pages.
And it's definitely apparent in reading it, and that's why that question stuck out to me so much. And I love how honest and open you were, Jordyn, because it's one interesting thing I found about the book was that I have read various straight romances and gay romances and sapphic romances, but I'd never read a bi romance, and that was so unique. So thank you for that. And you did kind of also step into my next question, which is great, because my next question was going to be to, now that we know a bit more about you and your backgrounds and the pieces of you that found their way into your work, I wanted to really dive into the stories, these books, their plots, all the juiciness and the messiness and the love. And I wanted to start with having you guys give us a synopsis. You can, bring us through some beats, bring us through the story to whatever your comfort level is that you want to share, just so we can set the stage, because after that, we're going to really start to dig into the themes and topics of these stories. Let's start with you, Ellie.
So touching a bit on what I've previously said, again, these are two characters who've just hit 30, and they're just kind of like, what am I doing in life? Both chronically single as well, and best friends since they were 3 years old. They're now 30. And just that moment where they're like, wait, why am I trying to find the person that I'm meant to be with by myself when the person who knows me best can probably be the best matchmaker there is? So they decide to matchmake each other. It goes absolutely horribly, completely shatters their friendship within the first third of the book. But then that friendship is just sort of reborn as something much, much better and more steamy than than the previous 30 years of their lives.
Sonya?
Yeah, so The Fake Matchmaker, yes, it only came out on Tuesday, so I'm still struggling with the high of this book coming out, because it's been just so rewarding. And the book took 4 years to come out in between my debut. I think with The Fake Matchmaker, at the time, as I was plotting out the story, it really was about the friendships that I have in my life and how a lot of men and women were struggling to find their partner. And so, if you know anything about Toronto, we would joke about how we should avoid King West because we don't want to date anybody there. And so, trying to navigate through the apps of Bumble and Hinge and all these things, I wanted my character to feel like that there was hope and love outside of that. And so Manisha really gets to a point where she finds out that she's struggling with her fertility journey, and she needs to kind of rush things. So she decides that nobody is good enough right now through the world of dating apps or setups. And so she gets this brilliant idea with her cousin to set up a matchmaking site where she is the only woman on the other side. And so there's hundreds of men that apply, and they don't know that she's the only woman. So it's very messy, it's very lovely, it's very chaotic, which is what I think my love life has been all about.
And a very good read, definitely. Is there anything else that you want to add, Jordyn?
I already gave you guys the elevator pitch for See You at the Summit, but I'll give you a few more details. One of which is that I grew up in Toronto, and I was so excited to set this book in Toronto. It's my sixth book, but the first one that I set in my home country and my hometown. So, and my character Simone, she starts a new job at a company called the Rainbow Museum, and it's one of these like museums that's really just one giant photo op, you know, where you just like go in and take really like Instagram friendly photos. And the idea behind the Rainbow Museum was that I wanted a place that really embodied the theme of the book, which is that queerness isn't about how you present on the outside or what kind of relationship you're in, it's who you are on the inside. And so I wanted to set the book in a place that was really like the antithesis of that idea, that was trying to sell customers on the idea that queerness is all about like how you pose with these rainbow statues and like what kind of haircut you have. And I wanted her to realize the corruption inside the Rainbow Museum as she goes on her own journey of self-discovery and accepting herself.
And that is definitely a journey that she has. But to watch it unfold and to read it is definitely a worthwhile time. So now that we have set the stage for these 3 books, and we kind of know about their plots and their beats and their main protagonists, I really want to start to dive into some of the things that I noticed coming out. For me, one of the first things I noticed reading these books was I was looking at, we have 3 characters. We have Summer in If Only You Knew, we have Manisha in The Fake Matchmaker, and we have Simone in If Only You Knew, and if we have Simone in See You at the Summit. And they each had these really interesting upbringings that I could tell were informing their identity and their roots and the choices that they were making or the conflicts that they were finding in who they wanted to be versus where they came from. Like, for instance, in If Only You Knew, Summer, she comes from a background where she's dealing with abandonment issues with her parents who've both kind of moved on and left her to pick up the pieces of the family that she once knew, versus Manisha in The Fake Matchmaker, who has a really tight-knit family, they're traditional Indian family, and they're very tight-knit, but then there's also various pressures that come from that, and you can see that she's a bit stifled, and she's trying to create balance. And I wanted us to dive into each of that and get your perspective on what it was like crafting these family structures and having it be the foundation for these really interesting characters that go through a lot of growth. So let's start with you, Sonya.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I look at it from the perspective of I'm a first-generation South Asian, and my parents are immigrants. And so I really felt like there was a lot of pressure growing up to focus on the personal life versus the career. And that's not because they necessarily put that pressure on me. It's almost as if they didn't know any better, just coming to Canada, and you have this small community in Guelph, where we grew up, and so there was maybe a handful of South Asian families, and so the rite of passage was, especially when you have 3 daughters, my dad was always like, what am I doing under this roof here with like 4 women, somebody help me. He felt like there was a little bit more protection if we just kind of did what they did back in India, which was get his girls married, and then we can sort out the career and stuff later. And so as I got older and I didn't want to go down a more traditional path, at least what I saw in my home for a career, I wanted to be a journalist, I wanted to write. things started to loosen up a little bit. You know, they didn't really have a choice. And so I
You
found...
loosened them up for them.
Yes, I did, yes. You know, because I left Guelph when I was 18. I went to school at Carleton. I got my journalism degree. You know, all these things that they couldn't pull me back towards heading into the direction that they wanted. And all that to say that the focus was really easy to talk to them about things because we grew up in a home with humor. And there was always moments that were heartfelt and, you know, surrounded by sadness at times and struggle. But my parents, you know, when you got them in the room with good food and humor and dancing, that's how I remember my childhood. And even now, you know, we know that if there is a conversation that tends to be heavy, my dad is going to say something that brings something lighter into the conversation. So that's what I wanted Manisha to really form and encompass through her family struggles, was that it's difficult to talk about fertility, particularly with two Indian parents, and dating. But at the end of the day, let's pepper it with some, you know, masala, as you would say.
And that's definitely something that come through that I noticed immediately with reading it, was I was just like, when you introduced us to the family and her dad is cooking and her mom is like so theatrical and dramatic.
Oh, so dramatic. It was like Bollywood coming out, you know?
Oh, truly. And I was just like, it felt very real, and I liked that. How about you, Jordyn?
So I feel very lucky that I did not come from a family anything like the one in
Okay,
the
good.
Summit. Yeah.
Because it was rough.
Yeah,
It was
no,
hard.
my family is so like open and affectionate and like loud and expressive and very sex positive. I feel really, really lucky about that. And I knew that when I was creating Simone's story, that like, yes, I love to write what I know, but above that, I also want to write what is going to be in service of the story that I want to tell. And so I knew that I needed a character who struggled for the first 29 years of her life to come out as bi. And so I couldn't really give her like the most open-minded, loving, sex-positive family ever. I had to put her in more of a conservative, traditional family. And so I put her in, like, I feel like the way that I imagine them is like, you know the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding? Like the non-Greek parents who like show up and they're very scared and they have like the bundt cake. Like that's kind of my image of what Simone's family is like, but I even think those parents were probably warm. They were just scared. Maybe it's more like the mom on Gossip Girl, like Serena's mom, like cold, like wealthy and cold, and
Yes.
uptight and conservative. So that was how I created her family, was thinking, what kind of family do I need to build to make Simone's story of being closeted until she was 29 years old believable? And that's who came out.
And it definitely did the trick, because you could see Simone's conflict and where she was coming from, and it made for a really good ending. So it was good. And you, Ellie?
Well, interestingly with mine, while Summer, the female protagonist in my book, the majority of her decisions and choices and her reasoning behind staying in this small town this whole life, despite having this bigger dream to leave, and yet you never actually see her parents on page and never have any dialogue with them in the book whatsoever. You see it through snippets and text messages of those missed moments where, her dad is too busy to pick up her call, but she's still leaving voicemails. You see it in, she enters a surf competition to try to get out of that small town family. And she's making those repeated outreaches to her father, come watch me. We used to do this all the time. The only reason I got into surfing was because it was our thing. But he's just with his new family, his twin toddlers, and just, the way she puts it is, twin toddlers need their dad more than a 30-year-old does. But in fact, as you can see throughout the course of the book, she needed him just as much, and he just wouldn't show up. And really her story was sort of finding a family outside of the blood relation. So that big found family moment at the end with Parker, the male protagonist's family, was very huge for her. And of course, it just kind of all leads up to, there's a final phone call with her dad where, again, it's just a voicemail, but it's her sort of just making the decision to move forward without, holding out hope for that resolution in the end.
And I actually have to say I found that moment of the book so powerful because, like, throughout the story leading up to that time, you can see that Summer is struggling and that she like you said, she maybe will make these excuses for, oh, maybe he needs his other family, maybe he's busy, but you can still see the pain that she's experiencing and how it's affecting even her, like the way her self-image and her performance out in the waves. And when she finally has this realization and she steps into herself and her identity and starts to see the found family around her, that was like a really rewarding moment for me, and hopefully everyone else when you guys get a chance to read it too. So another thing that I noticed about some of these books that I wanted to touch on was this recurring theme of growing up in a small town and gossip and rumors. And how, yeah, see, you guys are picking, you already know, Jordyn not so much because we love it. She's right down in the middle of Toronto.
There's a little country club scene, though.
But I was going to say.
There's a country club flashback.
That's very true. But don't worry, I have, even if this doesn't apply, I have more for you, so don't worry. But that was something that I did notice that was super strong in specifically If Only You Knew and The Fake Matchmaker, was that the prevalence of gossip and the rumor mill that fuels these communities' narratives is huge. And I was like, I think we should touch on this and the significance of the role it plays in these stories and how it affects these characters, because you can definitely see that it does. So let's start with you, Sonya. How does the gossip mill affect Manisha?
I mean, no offense, but have you ever met an Indian auntie? Like, I am actually now at this age where I'm qualified to be an Indian auntie, and like, I love gossip. It's like, as long as it's not hurting anybody, right? And I think that's what at least was really important to me in The Fake Matchmaker, and I hope you agree, is that the gossip was not necessarily intentional in a way that was going to hurt anyone's reputation or just hurt anybody. For me, it felt like it was more just like, so, what are you doing? What are you up to? When are you getting married? Like, we kind of have to go through those rites of passage, I think, when you're Indian, at least from my perspective. So I don't ever feel like Manisha was trying to fight the gossip. In fact, I would argue that she at times was fueling it.
Absolutely.
Yes. And her antics, with Rohit, who's my protagonist, and with Dina, her cousin. So I would argue that also that's what me and my sisters do, and we've got our little community WhatsApp chat going, and that group chat, everything in that group chat stays in that group chat. Yeah.
Yeah, you could definitely see that in the beginning of the book, there's times when she kind of feeds into or gives into the gossip, and then there's a switch. There's a very important switch there. How about you, Ellie? Let's talk about what happens in Oakwood Bay.
Oh, Lord. So the aforementioned disastrous matchmaking culminates in a very public scene in the middle of the small town, in which Summer, who is this small town darling, and again, part of the reason why she stuck around and didn't, leave town, was because she was a town darling, and she really loved that, and she loved that it became a pseudo family when her family was not around her. And then she has this fall from grace because this terrible thing happens publicly, and everyone sort of, not everyone, but everyone sort of turns on her and really, again, feeds into her lack of self-esteem. She really takes it hard. There was, again, this little family that she'd created for herself in lieu of her real family, and they've also now turned on her. And I get, for her journey, it was really about her learning that she didn't need to force love from people that weren't going to give it to you. It's to find those little pockets from within the larger group that were ready and willing to love you, despite, you know, the catastrophes going on in your life.
So one of the things that I found really interesting about these characters was that they're all, I would kind of put them as peers. The youngest protagonist is Simone. She's 29 and she turns 30. And then we have Manisha, who's 34, and Summer is 30. And I was like, they're all kind of in the same range here.
Okay, wait, but we love like a average age of 30 for a romance novel protagonist. Like, because
I don't know why that is.
Exactly.
No, but often I find that romance novel protagonists can skew so young, and I'm always looking, as you know, now I'm 34.
I love that, yeah.
I'm looking for romance novels with protagonists who are in their 30s or older.
You hit the nail right on the head, and I was literally gonna toss it to you. Because that is what I was like, this is refreshing. I was like, these women have lived. Tell me, please continue. Like, I loved your passion. I don't want you to stop. Like, why? Like, because you were like ready. Tell us why you wanted to put her in this place in her life to tell this story.
It is the place in somebody's life that I felt that I could write the best, you know, being around that age myself. And so that was probably a write what you know decision. But it also felt like it was in service to the story in that turning 30 is kind of this pivotal moment when you feel like you should have your life figured out. Like, not all of us do, but there's societal pressure, I think, to have it all figured out.
It's like, for some reason, it's this magic date, like, circled on the calendar of your life. I don't know why that is.
It's literally like a deadline.
Yeah, exactly.
Society will make you think it is. And so the pressure is, like, present for each of these three characters. And it's hitting Manisha hard because she...
It is. And also, I would argue it's right what you didn't know, you know? So for me, all the, not mistakes, you know, Oscar Wilde calls them experiences. So that's what I will refer to.
Experiences.
Yeah, so all the experiences that I made in my 30s, you know, like I'm in my 40s now, and I look back and think, I wish that someone had given me that space to make those mistakes and have those experiences. And now I look at it from the perspective of, okay, well, here, I'm gonna offer the advice that I didn't get. And that's why I chose to have that age for Manisha, yeah.
I'm obsessed with write what you didn't know.
Yeah, I love that. Trademark that later.
I have to think on this one for a little bit. I like that. Yeah, it was just so awesome reading this because it's true that like a lot of protagonists can tend to skew younger and these women, they were so, I think what made it really great reads is that they were rich in who they were. Like Manisha is a lawyer. Summer she's done competitive surf and she works in physiotherapy. Like they have careers and they have all these things, but then through the course of reading these books, we see that there's still so much that they have to learn and that we can learn through their experiences. So speaking of all the things that they've learned, one thing I noticed that was kind of recurring and fun was that these girls have a lot of dating disasters and pitfalls. These women are struggling on their dating journeys.
The struggle is real.
The
okay?
struggle was so real. Like literally from like page 1, Summer is in the midst of a disaster, and to the lengths that Manisha must go to. And it's funny because it was like I was reading these stories and I was like, wow, all of these experiences, it really says something about the state of modern dating and what it takes to get to that quote unquote Prince Charming, your person. And how important it is for them to do that, but what, the frogs that they must kiss and the experiences that they have to overcome to get there. And even in the case of Simone and even just navigating her queer identity and the things that the missteps that she has to overcome to be comfortable in who she is, even at this point in her life. And I was hoping that we could dive into that more and you could tell us more about each of their specifically their pitfalls and their disasters and how that becomes such a fun and gripping part of each of your stories. Let's start with you, Sonya.
So I remember getting this note from my editor, and we were going through Manisha's dating disasters, and my editor had said, just think of all the bad first dates you had. And I was like, where do I start? There's just so many, right? And so all of, my two books, compared to all the books that you both have, they both have real life disastrous dating experiences that I've had to go through. It's a sad state out there. So for me, at least, it was. And I think I wanted to make it funny because, listen, I myself at times had narcolepsy. I was just so sick of going on these dates, and I would pass out before the date was even going to happen. And so I felt like I wanted Manisha to embody not fear going into these dates, but to embody humor and to really be able to laugh at the end of the day because, listen, we talked about this. You got to have hope, right? It's the only thing you can have when you're trying to find your person, and hope eventually, I hope, leads to love.
And some of these dates that I was reading that Manisha was on, it was literally nightmare.
Nightmare, just they're so impossible. And I say, if you're going to be a friend of mine, or if you've ever dated me, be warned, you will be in a book of mine. Yeah.
I was like, these men cannot be real.
Oh, sadly they are. God. I hope no one's here though. But
and now we learned they are in fact very real. So tell us about Summer and her chronically single life.
Summer has red flag blindness. She'll flick through her dating apps and be like, abs, nice eyes, nice smile, yes. And we'll end up on a date with just the most horrible character.
Manisha and Summer should be friends, yes.
It sounds like it. To the point where she has instituted a fail-safe for her dates, which is her best friend Parker, who now sits in the same bar or restaurant where she's at with the guy and will throw him a little tap, 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 rescue me, in which he will come over and pretend, and this isn't a spoiler, literally chapter 1, will come over and pretend to be her long-lost lover. Like, oh my God, I cannot believe I'm laying eyes on you again. We are so meant to be. And finding a way to get rid of the guy post-haste because he was just never gonna do.
I definitely refer to it as a rescue mission. I was like, okay, so we're starting with chaos and a rescue mission. I love it. And so tell me, Jordyn, let's talk about Simone's experiences, because she definitely has her share of missteps.
She has a lot of dating pitfalls, but a lot of them occur within her relationship with Ryan. So Simone actually spends a good chunk of the book in a relationship with Ryan, who's the male love interest in the story, and a lot of the obstacles that she encounters are learning to navigate both the straight circles that she's in and the queer circles that she's in. Now that she is an out queer woman, but she's in this relationship that makes people think that she's straight. And so the way that I would boil down the obstacles that Simone faces as a person dating are this frustrating mixture of privilege and erasure that comes with being a bi woman in a hetero relationship, right? On the one hand, she feels guilty almost that, it is easier for her to walk down the street holding her partner's hand than it is for a lesbian colleague to walk down the street holding her wife's hand. But on the other hand, it does really hurt when your queer colleagues joke that you're only 50% queer because you're bisexual, or you're faking it, or because you're dating a man, or maybe she's just identifying as bi to be edgy. And so all of these thoughts are constantly going through Simone's head, to the point where she's going to parties with her new queer friends from the Rainbow Museum where she's working, and she feels the need to be like, this is my boyfriend Ryan, but just so you know, I'm bi, just so you know. And I wanted to put as many moments like that into the book as possible. There's a scene at that party where the female bartender, Simone, is trying to perform queerness, that the bartender mistakenly thinks that Simone is soliciting her for a threesome with her and Ryan. So those are the pitfalls that Simone encounters.
And it's interesting because one other thing that I noticed that I felt like once I saw it resolved at the end of the story, I could really see her growth, was that even before she starts dating Ryan, there's a bit of like a flashback to an ex named Bree, who she had been seeing, but she was like in denial of her queerness, and she's like full-blown dating this girl, Bree, yet telling Bree, no, I'm straight. And Bree's like, no, you're not. I hate to break it to you. And so even when she and Bree end up reconnecting, and you can see the growth that she's had since that time, and she's no longer like overcompensating or feeling the need to. It's like you can see that even in that lane, she's like developing as a person, and we love that.
Thank you.
So, continuing on the theme of kind of modern life, something that I realized that I thought was so interesting about all three of these books was the presence of phones. Phones play an interesting role in each of these books, and I was just like, that is so interesting, because I'm not used to seeing like texting and FaceTiming and other things appearing in my books. And I was like, this is so like current, and I love that. And I wanted to talk about why you each felt the significance of putting this very modern aspect that we all have. Like I have mine right here. They're literally pieces of us, so it makes sense. But how it was writing this into each of these stories, kind of some things that stuck out to me that I'll kind of like drop as thought starters, but you're welcome to pick them up or put them down. Something I thought was interesting was that the thing that brings Simone and Ryan together was literally like the catalyst is her dropping her phone on a chairlift, and the way that like any of us would freak out and immediately have to go like scavenging and digging for it. And I was like, this is so modern of us. And we just couldn't just enjoy the ski trip. No, we have to like go and almost risk our lives to go find our phone. And then so it's like things like that to Manisha and this viral video that is of her that is haunting her and that she has to kind of come to terms with. And even Summer and Parker and their how do I say this?
Wait, I was gonna. I was like, what is she gonna say for my?
You know what I'm gonna
yeah.
say, Ellie. You know what? Let's just start there. Tell us what you know that I know that you want to say.
You know, as I've said, they're childhood friends. There's a lot of trust between them. And when they enter in this new phase of their relationship with physical intimacy, they feel comfortable to explore shared kinks. One of them involves a phone. Phones. You can probably take a guess what they're doing with those. You know, it's really Summer and her need to have that extra bit of validation. She's gone through her entire adult life not feeling sufficiently loved and feeling like she's always chasing people's adoration and these accolades and love. And there in these moments is Parker just so transparently into her and so, tuned into her. And for her, it's just having those little, as he said, those little like moments of proof, like there he is, he really is. He really is all in with me. And it's hot, so.
It is hot. I was like, this is new, I like it, okay. Okay, so let's talk about tropes. One thing I noticed was there was some forced proximity going on. From one hotel room to even just the recurring shared space of a neighborhood cafe. Let's talk about the significance of why it was important to keep bringing these characters back to each other, even when they didn't want to be, and even when there was conflict, and even when it was uncomfortable. Why did they have to keep finding each other in these close, intimate spaces? Why was that important? And what did it do ultimately for the story? Let's start with you, Sonya.
I think I was drawing on real life experience there. For me, in particular, now, my relationship is with somebody that I did not like, many, many moons ago, and we worked in the same department, and now we laugh about it, but we really just couldn't stand each other, and we had to be in the same meetings. We were constantly talking about PR and marketing, and just trying to override each other. And years later, we eventually did become friends, but years later it turned into something else. And I think that's what I was trying to hint at with Manisha and the proximity. And in this case, it happens to be a coffee shop. And I think in this fast-paced world of our phones and just life, there's so many people, at least for me, that I'm sure I haven't met that I would love to be friends with. Earlier we were talking about Bumble BFF and how you had
I recently moved to Miami and made all my friends on Bumble BFF.
I love this for you, right? And I just think even as an adult, it's really difficult to make adult friendships the older you get, right? Female friendships, the older you get, especially if you've moved somewhere new. And I think for me, that proximity is I've met so many people now as I've become older who have turned into my best friends. And I'm so grateful and so lucky for being able to experience that. So I really wanted someone to take the time to see, at these book events, at the cafe, at work, where you fall in love, that's where everything happens. And so I wanted people to sort of slow down in that moment.
So more art imitating life.
Yes, exactly.
I love that your real life love story is one of my favorite romance tropes, which is workplace rivals.
Yeah,
falling in love.
Totally.
Okay, hating game.
I love
It's amazing. Although nothing happened at work, I promise.
Okay, she's just for HR purposes.
Okay, so one thing I really loved about all these protagonists is that they are imperfect. They make no qualms about their imperfections. They wear them, they own them. At least they're trying to, and eventually they do get there and they can heal them. And one of the growth arcs that really stuck out to me was Summer's, because just the things that she's able to overcome from letting go of all the trauma that she has from her family and her mom's affair to embracing found family until it literally feels triumphant. I was literally cheering. I was Team Summer. Tell me about what it was like writing an imperfect character like that.
I feel healing in a lot of ways. It was nice to see somebody so imperfect and she's trying to be perfect. Let's be real. She's trying really hard. Realize that perfect A isn't achievable, isn't all that fun either. And that whether she's perfect or not, she's still deserving of the love that she's been seeking her whole life. Yeah, she's a mess, but I love her for it.
She's a beautiful mess. We love Team Summer. Okay, so we're almost out of time, and I have one more question that I want to kind of leave us all with before we get into the Q&A. Each of these stories definitely scratched a part of my brain, and they made me think, and they made me feel, and it was just, the emotions were flooding, and I love that. So I wanted to know, as the authors of these stories, how did writing these stories change you or impact you in any way? Did it teach you about others, about yourself? Did you learn something new? Did you get a new perspective? How did this experience change you? Let's start with you, Sonya.
I see my debut sitting over there. Sorry, not sorry. So I would argue that I think I'm a better writer now. Growth, lots of growth. And I believe that I've built a strong community in the writing world. Really being able to, we talked about this, champion each other and being cheerleaders for each other. That's been important for me. And to open doors for other people. And I also think a big part of writing for me has been about telling stories that I didn't see growing up. So really not seeing myself on television as a South Asian woman or reading books about my stories that I had experienced. So that was something that I really wanted to grow into, because I think that I felt when I was younger, I was very much embarrassed for looking different, speaking a different language, and being a first-generation South Asian. So now I own it. I'm proud. You know, I will speak Punjabi all day. I will tell you that I'm Indian, and I think that there's just so much love now for that, and that's what I wanted Manisha to feel. And she knows she's not perfect, and she doesn't want to be, and that's how I go on with my life every day too. That I love to learn and I love to grow.
Love that. How about you, Jordyn?
Well, I've already talked about how, my own, personal identity journey and anxieties went into this book. So it was really healing, like you said, in that sense. But it was also validating in that I quit a dream job to write this book. So I actually also have a background in journalism, and I worked most recently at Men's Health magazine for 6.5 years, and I was the executive editor there, and a big part of my job was running all of our sex and relationships content, and I loved it so much, true dream job. But I had an idea for a romance novel about a woman who comes out as bi and then reluctantly falls for a straight guy. And at that point in my career, I had written 5 young adult novels while working a full-time job in journalism, and I just realized if I want to be able to also explore this idea for a queer adult romance that I have been dreaming of writing for so long, I need to make a drastic change in my life. And so I made the really difficult decision to leave that full-time job, and the first thing that I did was write the proposal for See You at the Summit. I left my job in April 2 years ago, spent the summer working on that proposal, and we went out on submission with it in the fall, and pretty soon got an amazing offer on it. And it was the scariest decision that I've ever made, but then getting that offer and getting to write this book, it was extremely validating to know that I had made the right call in essentially turning my life upside down for an idea that I really believed in.
Love that.
That. And let's finish off with you, Ellie.
Well, I sort of touched on already this idea of the magical doomsday of turning 30, and this sort of societal need to have everything lined up by the time you do. So I don't know that it was a lesson I learned while I was writing it, but maybe validating in the same way yours was, where it was again, they do have it all figured out by the time they're 30, but it wasn't the thing, and that's okay that they hadn't found what their true calling was at that time. It's never too late to figure it out.
I love that. All good takeaways. Thank you so much. I love this conversation. We laughed, we had fun, we learned about you and these stories and these really engaging characters, and I'm so glad that we could share this space together.